boy's name was Day. Hana learned this on the second day when he was strong enough to speak properly. He told her about his parents, about how they had come to Baekdu 7 looking for a fresh start. His father had been some kind of soldier before, though Dai did not know much about that. His mother had been a teacher. They were good people who worked hard and hurt no one. The raiders had come at night. His parents had hidden him in a storage compartment and told him to stay quiet no matter what he heard. He had obeyed, even when he heard the shouting and the sounds of violence, even when everything went silent. He had waited until morning before crawling out and finding them gone. Day told this story without crying. His voice stayed calm and steady. Hana found this strange for such a young human, but she said nothing. Perhaps he had no more tears left to shed. Perhaps he was simply stronger than he looked. Days turned into weeks. The storm season continued, keeping them trapped in the cave most of the time. Hana shared her meager food supplies with the boy, though it meant she often went hungry herself. Day never complained about the small portions or the bland taste. He ate everything she gave him and always said thank you. In return, he helped where he could. His small hands were better than her claws at certain tasks. He could thread wire through tiny holes, tie knots in rope, even repair some of her broken tools. He proved surprisingly clever with mechanical things, taking apart a damaged heat cell and figuring out how to make it work again. Hana taught him how to survive in this harsh place. She showed him which plants were safe to eat and which would kill him. She taught him how to read the weather, how to find water under snow, how to set traps for the small animals that sometimes ventured near. Day learned quickly, absorbing every lesson like a sponge soaking up water. At night, when the wind howled outside and the fire burned low, they would talk. Day asked endless questions about dragonkin culture, about other worlds, about everything he could think of. Hana found herself answering, sharing stories she had not told anyone in years. In turn, Day told her about humans and their strange ways. Humans, he explained, were different from dragonkin. They were not as strong or as long-lived. They could not fly or breathe fire, but they made up for it in other ways. They adapted. They learned. They refused to give up even when everything seemed hopeless. His people had survived ice ages and plagues and wars that should have destroyed them. They had crawled up from being primitive animals to building ships that crossed the stars. Hana listened to these stories with growing interest. She had never thought much about humans before. They were just there in the background doing their human things. But through Day's words, she began to see them differently. She began to understand that strength came in many forms. 3 months after she found him, the sky changed. Hana noticed it first while gathering frost moss from the rocks outside. The stars looked wrong. There were new lights up there, moving in patterns that were not natural. She stood staring upward for a long time, feeling a cold dread settle in her stomach that had nothing to do with the weather. By evening, everyone on Baekdu 7 could see them. Massive ships, dozens of them, appearing in orbit like dark clouds blocking out the stars. They were huge, each one larger than the biggest space station Hana had ever seen. And they were not friendly. Even from the ground, she could tell they were war vessels. The Krell. Hana recognized the ship designs from intelligence briefings she had seen years ago, back when she was still a warrior worth briefing. The Krell Dominion was an empire that had been expanding for decades, conquering world after world. They had destroyed entire civilizations, enslaved countless species. The dragonkin had always known the Krell might come for them someday. It seemed that day had arrived. The first strikes came without warning. Beams of pure energy lanced down from the sky, turning buildings into vapor and melting stone into glass. The dragon settlements, where the proud warriors and their families lived, were targeted first. Hana watched from her cliff as entire communities disappeared in brilliant flashes of light. She grabbed Day and ran. There was no thought involved, only instinct. The cave was no longer safe. If the Krell were systematic, and they usually were, they would eventually glass the entire planet. Nowhere would be safe. But she had to try. They fled into the wilderness, moving as fast as Day's small legs could carry him. When he started to fall behind, Hana picked him up and carried him. Her damaged wings spread for balance as she ran across the frozen ground. Behind them, the sky lit up again and again as orbital strikes rained down. Other survivors ran too. Hana saw them in the distance, dragonkin and humans and others all fleeing in panic. Some tried to reach their ships hoping to escape into space. But the Krell had blockaded the planet. Any vessel that tried to leave was destroyed instantly. By the third day, ground forces arrived. Krell soldiers dropped from the sky in armored drop pods, fanning out to hunt down survivors. They were efficient killers, working in coordinated teams with advanced weapons. Hana saw one squad corner a group of dragon warriors. The dragons fought bravely, but bravery meant nothing against superior firepower. They died within seconds. Hana and Day hid in a narrow canyon, pressed against the cold rock, barely breathing as Krell soldiers passed within meters of their position. The aliens were tall and thin, covered in black armor that made them look like walking shadows. Their heads were elongated with multiple eyes that glowed a sickly yellow. They carried weapons that hummed with deadly energy. One soldier stopped, its head turning toward their hiding spot. Hana's hand went to the crude knife she had made from scrap metal, knowing it would be useless against Krell armor but determined to fight anyway. Day remained perfectly still beside her, not making a sound. Then Day did something unexpected. He picked up a small stone and threw it hard in the opposite direction. It clattered against rock, and instantly all the Krell turned toward the sound. They moved that way in formation, their weapons raised. Hana pulled Day deeper into the shadows, and they slipped away while the soldiers investigated the noise. They ran until the canyon opened into a network of old lava tubes. Hana had explored these caves before, back when she first came to this world. They went deep into the planet's crust, a maze of tunnels that would be almost impossible to map. She pulled Day inside, and they descended into darkness. In the tunnels, they found others. Dragonkin who had escaped the initial attacks. Human colonists who had survived the raiders only to face this new threat. Even a few members of other species who had been on Baekdu 7 for various reasons. They huddled together in the darkness, terrified and lost. A dragon warrior named Tay tried to organize them. He was older than Hana, his scales dark green and scarred from many battles. He had been a commander once before retirement brought him to this colony world. He took charge naturally, assigning watch positions and rationing the limited supplies they had managed to bring. Tai looked at Hana with barely hidden contempt when he learned who she was. The disgraced warrior, the coward who had failed her mission. He made it clear she was only tolerated because they needed every able body. Hana accepted this without argument. She deserved his scorn. But when Tay saw Day, his expression softened slightly. Children were precious to dragonkin, even human children. They represented the future, hope for tomorrow. Tay gave Day an extra portion of food and told him not to be afraid. That night, huddled in the cold tunnels with the sounds of distant explosions filtering down from above, Day whispered to Hana. He told her about his father's stories of human military tactics, about how humans had learned to fight enemies who were stronger and better armed, about guerrilla warfare and resistance movements. Hana listened, and an idea began to form in her mind. They could not win a direct fight against the Krell. That was obvious. The Krell were too strong, too numerous, too advanced. But perhaps they did not need to win a direct fight. Perhaps there was another way. She looked at the small human boy beside her, who had survived losing his parents, had survived the cold and hunger, had just helped them escape Krell soldiers with a simple trick. And she thought maybe, just maybe, this child who should have been weak and helpless might be exactly what they needed. Krell thought they had conquered. Baekdu 7, they thought the survivors would simply wait in the dark to be found and killed. But they did not know about Day. They did not know about the strange bond between a disgraced dragon and a human child. And that ignorance would cost them dearly. The wind screamed across the frozen wasteland like a dying animal. Snow fell so thick that Hana could barely see her own clawed hands in front of her face. She pulled her torn cloak tighter around her body, but it did little to keep out the cold. Her scales, once bright crimson and polished like armor, were now dull and scratched. Several were missing entirely, leaving patches of vulnerable skin exposed to the bitter wind. Hana moved through the ruins of the old mining settlement with practiced steps. She had walked this path many times before. The buildings were half collapsed, their metal walls twisted and broken. Most had been stripped clean years ago, but sometimes she found small things worth keeping. A coil of wire, a broken tool that could be fixed. Once she had even found a working heat cell that kept her warm for 3 whole days. Today she found nothing. The storm had buried everything under fresh snow. Hana cursed under her breath, her forked tongue flicking out between sharp teeth. Winter on Baekdu 7 was always harsh, but this year felt worse than usual. Food was scarce. The small animals that normally burrowed in the rocks had disappeared. Even the hardy frost moss that grew on the north side of buildings seemed to be dying. She should leave this place. Find a way off this frozen rock of a planet. But that required money, and Hana had none. It also required someone willing to give passage to a disgraced dragon warrior, and that was even harder to find than money. So she stayed scraping by day after day, surviving when many others would have given up. The dragonkin did not forgive failure. Hana had learned that the hard way. 2 years ago, she had been a respected officer in the Dragon Legion, commanding her own unit. Then came the mission on Corvin Station. Her orders had been clear: eliminate the rebel leaders no matter the cost. But when Hana breached the compound, she found families inside. Children. The rebels had been using them as shields. She had hesitated. In that moment of doubt, the rebels escaped. Her superiors called it cowardice, weakness. They stripped her of rank, of honor, of everything she had worked her whole life to achieve. They took her weapons, her armor, even the small fortune she had saved. Then they dumped her here, on this worthless colony world at the edge of nowhere, and told her she was lucky they let her live. Hana often wondered if death would have been kinder. At least it would have been quick. This was a slow death, freezing and starving by degrees, watching her proud body waste away. Her wings, once powerful enough to carry her through the air for hours, were now tattered membranes that barely functioned. She could not remember the last time she had truly flown. A sound cut through the howling wind. Hana stopped, her head tilting to one side. There it was again, a soft whimpering, almost lost in the storm. She turned toward it, her feet crunching through the snow. The sound came from a collapsed building ahead, one she had searched weeks ago and found empty. She approached carefully. Raiders sometimes use tricks to lure people into ambushes, but as she got closer, the whimpering grew louder, and she realized it was the sound of a child crying. Hana's chest tightened. She pushed through the broken doorway and into the dim interior of the structure. In the corner, huddled against the wall, was a small human boy. He could not have been more than 7 or 8 years old. His lips were blue with cold and his whole body shook with violent shivers. His clothes were far too thin for this weather. Frost had formed on his dark hair and eyebrows. 2 bodies lay nearby, already stiff with death and cold. Adult humans, probably the boy's parents. Raiders had been through here recently. Hana could see the signs. Overturned crates, scattered belongings, blast marks on the walls. The family must have been hiding here when the raiders found them. The boy looked up at her with wide, dark eyes. He should have been terrified. Hana knew what she looked like. A monster from nightmares with her sharp teeth and claws, her reptilian face and glowing yellow eyes. Humans feared dragonkin. That was natural. That was how things were, but the boy did not scream. He did not try to run. He simply stared at her, teeth chattering, too cold and too weak to do anything else. His lips moved, trying to form words, but no sound came out. Hana should walk away. Humans were nothing to her. Her people looked down on them as weak and inferior, short-lived creatures who built their civilizations on luck rather than strength. They had no honor, no warrior code. They were barely worth noticing, and yet she did not walk away. Something in those eyes held her. The boy was dying, and he knew it. But there was no begging in his gaze, no pleading, just acceptance and perhaps a tiny spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, this strange creature might help him. Hana cursed herself for a fool. She unwrapped the cloak from her shoulders, feeling the immediate bite of cold against her scales. She knelt beside the boy and wrapped the fabric around him, lifting his small body into her arms. He weighed almost nothing. His skin felt like ice against her scales. She carried him out of the ruined building and into the storm. Her cave was not far, but the journey felt endless. The wind fought her every step, trying to tear the child from her grasp. Her muscles ached with cold and exhaustion. More than once she stumbled and nearly fell. Finally, she reached the cave entrance, a narrow opening in the side of a cliff that was easy to miss unless you knew where to look. Inside it was dark and cold, but at least the wind could not reach them. Hana had made a small home here over the months. A pile of rags served as a bed. A circle of stones marked where she sometimes managed to build a fire. A few containers held water and what little food she had. She laid the boy on the rags and worked quickly. Her claws were not made for delicate work, but she managed to remove his frozen boots and examine his feet. Frostbite had already set in. His toes were white and hard. She rubbed them gently. trying to restore circulation, knowing that if she could not, he would lose them. The boy's eyes had closed. For a moment, Hana thought he had died. Then his chest moved with a shallow breath and relief flooded through her. She gathered the few pieces of wood she had saved and built a small fire. It took several tries with her fire starter before the flames caught, but eventually weak orange light filled the cave. She heated water in a battered metal cup and held it to the boy's lips. At first he did not respond. Then his throat moved, swallowing reflexively. She gave him more, small sips letting the warmth spread through his body. Slowly, color began to return to his face. Hours passed. Hana sat beside him, feeding the fire with her precious wood supply, watching over the small human child who should have meant nothing to her. She told herself she was being foolish, sentimental, weak, all the things her people despised. But when the boy's eyes finally opened and he looked at her with clear awareness, something in Hana's chest tightened in a way she had not felt in years. He reached out with one small hand and touched her scaled arm. His voice was barely a whisper, rough from cold and crying, but she heard the words clearly. Thank you. 2 simple words. Nothing special, but they struck Hana harder than any blow she had ever taken in combat. No one had thanked her for anything in 2 years. No one had shown her kindness or gratitude or even basic courtesy. She was disgraced, worthless beneath notice. But this human child who had lost everything, who had every reason to fear and hate the world, looked at the monster who saved him and offered thanks. Hana felt something crack inside her, some hard shell she had built around her heart to survive the pain of her fall from grace. She nodded once, unable to trust her voice. The boy smiled just a little and closed his eyes again. This time his breathing was steady and even. He would survive the night. They both would, and perhaps Hana thought that was enough for now. The survivors argued for 3 days about what to do. Most wanted to stay hidden in the tunnels, hoping the Krell would eventually leave. Tay disagreed. He wanted to fight, to die with honor rather than cower in the dark. But when he proposed attacking a Krell position, the others looked at him like he was insane. They had no weapons except what they had grabbed while fleeing. A few plasma rifles with limited charge, some knives and tools. Against Krell armor and advanced technology, they might as well be throwing rocks. A direct assault would be suicide, and everyone knew it. Day sat quietly through these arguments, listening carefully. Hana noticed him studying the equipment they had salvaged from the surface. Old mining tools, lengths of cable, containers of chemicals used for ore processing. His young face was thoughtful, calculating. On the 4th day he approached Tay. The old dragon commander looked down at the small human boy with barely concealed impatience. They were discussing serious matters of war and survival. This was no time for children to interrupt, but Day did not ask for attention or comfort. Instead, he picked up a piece of wire and a small power cell. With quick, precise movements, he connected them to a metal container filled with a particular mining chemical. Then he attached a simple timer mechanism salvaged from a broken heater. The device sat there crude and simple. Tay stared at it without understanding. Day explained in his quiet, serious voice. The chemical, when given an electrical charge, became highly unstable. Explosive. This device would detonate after a set time. It was primitive, yes, but it would work. More importantly, Day continued, they could make dozens of these from the supplies they had. The Krell wore armor that could stop plasma fire, but explosions created shockwaves, concussive force that went around armor instead of trying to penetrate it. Place enough of these devices correctly and you could take out a Krell patrol. The dragons stared at him. One of them, a young female warrior named Isul, laughed. Take orders from a human child? Use crude bombs like common terrorists? Where was the honor in that? Where was the glory? Day met her gaze calmly. He asked if she would rather die with honor or live to fight another day. He asked if glory mattered when her entire species might be exterminated. He asked if she wanted to be remembered as a great warrior or as someone who survived. The words hit hard. Isul fell silent, her expression troubled. Tay studied the boy for a long moment. Then slowly he nodded. They would try it. Not because he believed it would work, but because doing something was better than waiting to die. Day spent the next week teaching them how to build the bombs, how to set timers, how to place them for maximum effect. He drew diagrams in the dirt, explaining blast radiuses and shrapnel patterns with a knowledge that seemed far beyond his years. When asked where he learned these things, he simply said his father had taught him, but he taught them more than just bomb making. He taught them tactics. Guerrilla warfare, he called it. Hit and run. Never fight fair. Never give the enemy a chance to bring their full strength against you. Strike from ambush, cause damage, then disappear before they can respond. Use the environment. Set traps. Create diversions. Make the enemy paranoid. Make them waste resources searching for threats that might not exist. Force them to spread their forces thin. Then hit the weak points hard and fast. The dragonkin listened, some with skepticism, others with growing interest. These tactics were unlike anything taught in their warrior academies. They were cowardly by dragon standards, dishonorable. But as Day pointed out, the Krell did not care about dragon honor. They only cared about winning. The first test came 2 weeks after they entered the tunnels. A Krell patrol was spotted near one of the tunnel entrances, setting up sensor equipment. Tay wanted to lead a direct assault, but Day suggested something different. They planted 3 bombs along the route the patrol would take. Simple devices hidden under rocks and debris. Then Hana and another dragon created a diversion on the opposite side, making noise and showing themselves briefly before retreating into the tunnels. The Krell took the bait. They moved toward the diversion in formation, confident and professional. They passed over the first bomb without noticing it. Then the second. Then the third. Day triggered them remotely, using a simple radio transmitter he had built from salvaged parts. The explosions were not large, but they did not need to be. The concussive force knocked the Krell soldiers off their feet. Their armor protected them from the worst of it, but the shrapnel from the rocks found gaps and weak points. When the smoke cleared, the entire patrol lay dead or dying. Not a single survivor had escaped to report back. The resistance had won its first victory without losing a single fighter. Without even being seen, the mood in the tunnels changed after that. The survivors realized they might actually have a chance. Not to win, perhaps, but to hurt the Krell, to make them pay for every inch of ground, to show them that Baekdu 7 would not fall quietly. More attacks followed. Small ones at first. A bomb placed in a supply depot. Sensors destroyed in the night. Krell soldiers found dead with no witnesses, their throats cut or their necks broken. The resistance learned to be ghosts, striking without warning and vanishing into the frozen wilderness. Day coordinated everything. He organized the fighters into small teams, pairing dragonkin strength with human cunning. He taught them signals and codes. He planned each operation carefully, always making sure they had escape routes and backup plans. His young mind worked like a tactical computer, seeing patterns and possibilities that others missed. Hana watched him with growing amazement. This was the same child she had found freezing in a ruined building, too weak to stand. Now he commanded hardened warriors twice his size, and they obeyed him because his plans worked, because he kept them alive while hurting the enemy. Not everyone accepted him easily. Isol still argued that following a human child was shameful, that they should fight with honor, face their enemies in open combat. One evening she challenged Day directly, demanding to know what gave him the right to give them orders. Day looked at her calmly. He did not raise his voice or show anger. He simply asked her a question. Did she want to be right, or did she want to survive? Did she want to follow the old ways and die gloriously? Or learn new ways and maybe, just maybe, see her home again someday? Then he pointed out the facts. Since following his tactics, they had killed over 30 Krell soldiers, while losing only 2 of their own fighters. The Krell were now moving in larger groups, afraid to send small patrols. They were wasting resources on security instead of their conquest. The resistance was making a difference. Isol had no answer to that. The numbers did not lie. Slowly, reluctantly, she nodded her acceptance. She still did not like taking orders from a human child, but she could not argue with success. Word of their resistance began to spread. Other survivors, hidden in different parts of the planet, heard rumors of a group that was actually fighting back. Some made their way to the tunnels asking to join. The resistance grew from a handful of desperate refugees to a real fighting force. Tay officially made Day their tactical advisor. It was an unprecedented move, giving such authority to a human child. But no one argued. They had all seen what he could do. They had all benefited from his strategies. Pride mattered less than survival, and Day was keeping them alive. Late at night, when the others slept, Hana would find Day sitting alone, staring at maps he had drawn of Krell positions. She would sit beside him, offering silent support. Sometimes he would talk about his father, about the lessons he had learned. Other times he would just sit quietly, the weight of responsibility heavy on his young shoulders. Hana wanted to tell him he was doing too much, taking on too much responsibility for a child. But she knew he would not listen. He had already lost everything. The only thing he had left was this fight, this purpose. So she stayed beside him, a silent guardian, ready to protect him from anything except the burden he had chosen to carry. The Krell were growing frustrated. Their easy conquest had turned into a grinding campaign. They could not find the main resistance base. Every patrol they sent disappeared or came back damaged. Their soldiers grew nervous, jumping at shadows. This was not supposed to happen. Inferior species were not supposed to fight back so effectively. In their arrogance, the Krell never suspected the truth. They never imagined that their greatest enemy, the mind behind their troubles, was a 9-year-old human boy who had learned tactics from bedtime stories. They searched for a great general, a legendary warrior. They never thought to look for a child, and that mistake would cost them more than they could possibly imagine. 2 months into the resistance, Day made a discovery. While exploring an abandoned section of the old colony, he found a human facility that had somehow escaped the Krell bombardment. Most of it was destroyed, but one room remained intact. Inside was a communication beacon, old but still functional. Hana watched as Day examined the device carefully. His small hands moved over the controls with surprising confidence. He checked power levels, tested circuits, made small adjustments. The beacon had been designed to send emergency signals across vast distances of space, though it needed substantial power to reach beyond a single solar system. When Day announced his plan to use the beacon, Tay was skeptical. Even if they could power it, even if the signal reached anyone, what good would it do? The nearest human settlements were weeks away by faster-than-light travel, and humans, for all their cleverness, did not have the military strength to challenge the Krell dominion. The dragon kin shared this view. They had respect for human intelligence, for the tricks and tactics Day had taught them. But in their minds, humans were still weak. Their ships were smaller, their weapons less powerful. A human fleet would be destroyed by Krell warships within minutes. Day listened to their doubts without arguing. Then he explained something they did not know. Before the colony was established, before his parents brought him to this frozen world, he had lived on a core human world called New Earth. His father had not been just any soldier. He had been a tactical officer in the Terran Defense Fleet, working under Admiral Yuna, one of humanity's most respected commanders. Yuna was Day's aunt, his father's sister. She had opposed their decision to leave military life and settle on a remote colony. There had been arguments, angry words. His father wanted peace, wanted to raise his son away from war. Yuna believed every capable person had a duty to serve. They had parted on bad terms, but family was family. Day knew the emergency codes that would flag the message as urgent and route it directly to his aunt. He knew she would come if she could, and more importantly, he knew something the dragonkin did not. Humanity had been preparing for war with the Krell for years. They had been building ships, developing weapons, training soldiers. They were not the weak species everyone assumed. The dragons did not believe him. How could humans, who had only been in space for a few centuries, match the Krell? It seemed impossible. But Day was insistent. He had seen the shipyards, had heard his father talk about the new dreadnoughts being built. Humanity knew the Krell were coming eventually, and they had not been idle. Even if Day was right, there was a bigger problem. The beacon needed power, lots of it. The facility's old generators were dead, drained years ago. They would need to raid a Krell position and steal power cells, a dangerous operation that might cost lives. Day planned the raid with his usual careful attention to detail. They would hit a Krell supply depot at night, during a shift change when security would be temporarily reduced. A small team would disable the perimeter sensors, while a larger group created a diversion on the other side of the facility. During the confusion, Hana and 2 other dragons would infiltrate the depot and grab as many power cells as they could carry. The plan was risky. One mistake, one unlucky sensor that did not get disabled, and they would all die. But everyone agreed it was worth trying. If there was even a small chance of getting help from human forces, they had to take it. The raid happened 3 nights later. Everything went according to plan at first. The sensors were disabled. The diversion drew off most of the guards. Hana led her team into the depot, moving through shadows like ghosts. They found the power cells stored in a heavily secured room, but Day had taught them how to bypass Krell locks using salvaged tech. Then things went wrong. A Krell soldier, returning from an errand, spotted them as they were leaving. He raised the alarm before Hana could silence him. Suddenly lights blazed everywhere, and soldiers poured out of barracks buildings. Hana made a split-second decision. She ordered her team to run while she stayed behind to slow the pursuit. It was a suicide move, and she knew it. But the power cells had to reach Day. The message had to be sent. Her life was a small price to pay. She fought like the warrior she had once been, claws and teeth and fury against Krell weapons. She took down 3 soldiers before plasma fire caught her in the side, burning through scales and into flesh. The pain was enormous, but she kept fighting, kept moving, leading the Krell away from her fleeing team. More shots hit her. Her left wing tore. Her leg gave out. Hana collapsed against a wall, bleeding from multiple wounds, knowing this was the end. She had failed so many times in her life, but not tonight. Tonight she had done her duty. She had protected those under her care. She would die with honor. But then Day appeared, seemingly from nowhere. The boy had followed the raid team despite being ordered to stay safe. He had watched from hiding, and when Hana fell, he could not stop himself. He ran to her, his small body sliding in beside hers, covering her with his own as if he could shield her from the Krell weapons. Hana tried to push him away, tried to make him run, but she was too weak. The Krell closed in, weapons raised. This was it. They would both die here. Then Tay and half the resistance burst from the shadows. They had seen what was happening and abandoned their positions to mount a rescue. It was tactically foolish. Everything Day had taught them said never to commit everyone to one fight. But they came anyway because Day was worth saving. Because Hana was worth saving. The fight was brutal and close range. Dragonkin warriors tore into Krell soldiers with savage fury. Humans triggered explosive charges they had planted around the depot during earlier scouting trips. In the chaos, someone grabbed Hana, someone else grabbed Day, and they ran. They lost 3 fighters that night. Good people who died protecting their tactical advisor and their wounded warrior. But they got the power cells, and more importantly, they all made it back to the tunnels alive. Hana spent 2 weeks recovering from her wounds. Day stayed by her side, changing bandages, bringing food, keeping watch. He blamed himself for her injuries, said he should have been more careful with the planning. Hana told him he was a fool. She had chosen to fight. That was her decision, not his. While she healed, Day worked on the beacon. He installed the stolen power cells, tested every circuit and connection. He composed a message that included their situation, their location, and detailed intelligence on Krell forces, tactics, and technology. Everything they had learned through months of fighting. On the day the beacon was ready, everyone gathered to watch. Day entered the final commands, routing maximum power to the transmitter. The device hummed to life, lights flickering across its control panel. Then with a sound like thunder, it sent its message racing across the stars. The message was simple. This is Day, son of Commander Jiho. Baekdu 7 is under Krell occupation. We are still fighting. Please send help. And then he added the tactical data, page after page of information that would be invaluable to any military force planning to engage the Krell. After the message was sent, they waited. Days passed with no response. Then weeks. The Krell had detected the transmission and were hunting for its source, forcing the resistance to move constantly. Supplies ran low. People began to lose hope. Some openly said the message had been a waste. Either it had not reached anyone or the humans had ignored it. Why would they risk a fleet for one small colony world? It made no tactical sense. But Day never stopped believing. His aunt would come. She had to. Family was everything to her, even when they fought. Even when they disagreed, she would not abandon him. He was certain of it. On the 23rd day after the message was sent, the sky caught fire. Not from Krell weapons, but from dozens of massive ships dropping out of faster-than-light travel. They appeared all at once in perfect formation surrounding the planet. Hana stared upward, her mouth open in shock. These were human ships. She could see the markings, the design signatures, but they were not small scout vessels or cargo haulers. These were warships, dreadnoughts, each one bristling with weapons, armored like fortresses, moving with deadly purpose. The Krell fleet moved to engage, confident in their superiority. They outnumbered the humans 2-1, but the humans did not hesitate. They attacked with coordinated precision, their weapons firing in perfectly timed volleys. Krell shields flickered and failed. Krell ships exploded. Beside her, Day smiled. It was a small, tired smile, but real. He whispered 2 words that changed everything the Dragonkin thought they knew about humanity. She came. The battle in orbit was like nothing Hana had ever witnessed. The human ships moved with deadly efficiency, exploiting every weakness in Krell formations. They used tactics that seemed familiar somehow, and then Hana realized why. They were using the intelligence Day had sent. The tactical data from months of guerrilla warfare was now being applied on a massive scale. Human warships targeted Krell sensor arrays first, blinding them. Then they struck at communication hubs, isolating Krell ships from their command structure. Finally, they focused overwhelming firepower on individual targets, destroying them one by one before moving to the next. It was brutal, efficient, and devastatingly effective. The Krell had numbers, but humans had something more important. They had information. They knew Krell shield frequencies, weapon ranges, and tactical doctrines. They knew exactly where to hit and when. The intelligence Day had gathered, bought with blood and sacrifice, was now saving human lives and destroying enemies. Within 2 hours, half the Krell fleet was destroyed. The rest attempted to retreat, but human ships were faster. They ran down the fleeing vessels and eliminated them without mercy. By the time the sun set on Bectu 7, the space above the planet belonged to humanity. Landing craft descended through the atmosphere, their hulls scorched from atmospheric entry, but their weapons ready. Krell ground forces attempted to resist, but they were already demoralized by the loss of orbital support. Human Marines deployed with military precision, securing landing zones and pushing outward. One landing craft touched down near the tunnel entrances. The ramp lowered, and soldiers in powered armor emerged, weapons scanning for threats. At their lead was a woman whose uniform bore the insignia of an admiral. She was older than most of the soldiers, with gray streaking her dark hair, but she moved with the confidence of someone who had fought many battles. Admiral Yuna. Dai recognized her immediately, even though it had been years since they last met. He stepped out from the tunnel entrance, and for a moment they simply stared at each other. Then Yuna crossed the distance in quick strides and pulled him into a fierce embrace. She held him for a long time, this hardened military commander who led fleets into battle, holding her nephew like he was the most precious thing in the universe. When she finally pulled back, there were tears on her cheeks. She apologized for the argument, for letting him leave, for not being there when raiders killed his parents. Day told her it was not her fault. His parents had made their choice, and it had been the right one for them. They had been happy on Bectu 7, even if that happiness was cut short. And he had survived because someone had been kind to him. Someone had chosen to save a human child when she had every reason not to. He gestured toward Hana, who stood nearby with the other resistance fighters. The dragon warrior looked uncomfortable under the admiral's gaze, perhaps expecting judgment or scorn. But Yuna walked over and did something unexpected. She saluted, a formal military salute of respect. The admiral thanked Hana for protecting her nephew, for keeping him alive, for helping him become the person who had provided intelligence that saved countless human lives. Without Hana, Day would have died in that first blizzard. Without Day, the Krell would have conquered Bectu 7 completely, and the human fleet would have arrived too late to make a difference. Hana did not know how to respond to praise from a human admiral. She mumbled something about only doing what anyone would do. Yuna smiled and shook her head. Most would have walked away. Most would have left a child to die rather than risk themselves. Hana had chosen differently, and that choice had changed everything. Over the next few days, human Marines worked with the resistance to hunt down remaining Krell forces. It was not easy. The Krell were excellent soldiers who fought to the last, but they were outnumbered now, cut off from supplies and reinforcements, facing an enemy that knew their every tactic. During this time, Admiral Yuna called a meeting with the Dragonkin leaders. Tay and several other commanders attended, wary but curious. The admiral made them an offer. Humanity would help liberate other worlds conquered by the Krell, but only if the Dragonkin were willing to fight alongside humans as equals, not as superior beings granting favors to inferiors. It was a difficult proposition. Dragon culture was built on hierarchy, on the idea that strength determined worth. Accepting humans as equals meant abandoning beliefs that went back thousands of years. Some of the dragon commanders refused immediately, offended by the very suggestion. But Tay was quiet, thinking. He had seen what human tactics and dragon strength could accomplish together. He had watched a human child teach them how to fight, how to survive, how to win against impossible odds. He had learned that strength came in many forms and wisdom meant recognizing that. Still, he hesitated. This was not just a tactical decision. It was cultural, philosophical. It meant admitting that Dragonkin had been wrong about many things. That was hard to accept. Then Hana spoke. She told the commanders about finding Day half frozen and dying, about how easy it would have been to walk away, to let nature take its course. She had been taught her entire life that humans were weak, that they did not matter, that caring for them was beneath a dragon warrior. But she had saved him anyway, and that choice, that moment of compassion that defied everything she had been taught, had led to this, to a human fleet arriving to save them, to Krell forces being driven from their world, to a chance for survival that had seemed impossible just weeks ago. Hana said that true strength was not just physical power or military might. It was the courage to admit when you were wrong, the wisdom to learn from others, even those you had dismissed as inferior, the compassion to help someone who needed it, regardless of what your culture said about them. She knelt before Day, this disgraced warrior humbling herself before a human child, and thanked him for teaching her what real strength meant, for showing her that honor was not about following old rules but about doing what was right even when it was hard. The chamber fell silent. Every dragonkin present understood the significance of this gesture. Hana had thrown away her pride, the last thing a disgraced warrior had left to make a point. And that point could not be ignored. Tay stood and walked to where Admiral Yuna waited. He offered his clawed hand in the human gesture of agreement. Yuna took it without hesitation, sealing a partnership between species that had viewed each other with condescension and suspicion for generations. Other dragon commanders followed one by one. Not all of them, but enough to make a difference, enough to build something new. Over the following months, human and dragon forces worked together to liberate world after world from Krell occupation. It was hard, bloody work. They lost ships and soldiers, both species bleeding together for a common cause. But they won more often than they lost, and each victory weakened the Krell dominion further. Day remained with his aunt aboard the flagship. He was too young to be a soldier, but his tactical insights proved invaluable. Admiral Yuna consulted him before major operations, and more than once his suggestions saved lives. The boy who had learned warfare from bedtime stories became one of humanity's most effective tactical advisors. Hana received a full pardon from the Dragonkin government. Her honor was restored, her rank returned. They offered her command of a unit, a chance to rebuild the career she had lost. But she declined. Instead, she requested assignment as Day's personal guardian, a position that was granted immediately. She went where he went, standing watch while he worked, protecting him from any threat. It was not the glorious position she might have had, but it was the one she wanted. The boy had saved her in ways that had nothing to do with physical rescue. She would spend the rest of her life ensuring no harm came to him. The war against the Krell Dominion lasted 3 years. It ended not with the Krell's complete destruction, but with a negotiated peace. The Dominion had learned that conquering peaceful species was no longer easy, that their victims now had allies, that humanity, for all their short time in the stars, was not weak. The galaxy had learned several important lessons, that physical strength was not the only measure of worth, that compassion could be as powerful as any weapon, that species dismissed as inferior might surprise everyone, and that humanity, when protecting their own, when fighting for what they believed in, was absolutely terrifying. Years later, when people asked Admiral Yuna about the turning point in the war, she always gave the same answer. The turning point was not any battle or strategic victory. It was a cold day on a frozen planet, when a disgraced dragon warrior chose to save a human child instead of walking away. That one moment of compassion, that simple choice to help someone who needed it, had started a chain of events that changed the entire galaxy, because that is what humanity did best. They adapted, they persevered. They refused to accept that anything was impossible, and when someone showed them kindness, they remembered. They came back. They helped in return. The Krell Dominion had expected easy conquest. They had dismissed humanity as weak and insignificant. They never imagined that humans would be the ones to organize resistance, to unite different species, to fight back so effectively. They learned too late that you should never underestimate a species that valued compassion as much as strength.